All right, I am recording for Plus Expenses.
Plus expenses.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Wait, 2 years again? Yeah, you're good. Okay.
Can you hear the plane going overhead?
Do you have a plane?
I do, but
I do not.
I don't live right next to the sky like you do, or whatever it is that's happening with your plane situation.
Yes, I used to live close to the sky in Chicago, and now I live close to the airfield in Washington. So for years we had to battle the plane noises, but here we are.
Here we are.
This
is it. This is the yeah.
We've been calling this the crossover Plus Expenses.
Yeah, the crossover.
This is marking our official point where we're transitioning our roughly bi-weekly recording schedule from the previous 7 years of doing 200 a day.
Almost 8. It was December 23rd, 2016, according to Fireside FM.
Yes, we dropped our first episodes. We recorded them in 2016, and then we started dropping them in 2017, and they were backdated. But
there. I see. That's what it was.
Yeah. So in my head, I date us from 2017, because it was like December 2016, I think. So anyway, but we're coming up, anyway, we don't need to do that math.
No.
The point is, we're transitioning from that podcast to a new podcast where we've found another excuse to continue talking and doing a podcast.
Yes.
Instead of getting therapists. So, but we will continue doing Plus Expenses because, everything really, when you get down to it, has, some expenses.
What we're doing right now is a political cartoon with a Firebird with a caricature of James Gardner hanging out the window and handing off a baton to, like the relay race.
Yes.
But I don't know to what.
To a wizard.
To a wizard. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Yes. Who's ready to take on the next leg of the race and clearly does not look like he's capable of doing it.
Right.
I like that Gardner gets to drive the Firebird through.
Oh, yeah.
His part of maybe the wizard gets a flying carpet or something. I don't know.
Well, or the wizard gets in a van that's painted with another wizard on it.
Yes, a van with that sweet Unwritten Earth Symposium logo on it.
Yeah. It just has a lot of lines.
Yeah. Oh no, I do like a wizard on a van with like a different painted
with a painting of a cooler wizard.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's good. Yeah. So bittersweet, huh?
Yeah. As I say, I've been feeling some kind of way about it. So this Plus Expenses, we're going to put it on the regular public feed for both shows.
Yes.
So, if this is the first time you've heard this kind of conversation, we've done one of these before every episode of 200 a day for the last 80 something of those. There's like 86 or something on and I think we did 1 or 2 of them as public drops, but they've mostly been a patron exclusive thing. And then when we start the new podcast, which is the Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast, where we'll talk about that more in a minute, we're going to continue doing Plus Expenses, though we think after that show.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that, and I can share them now if you'd like. But let's finish this.
Yeah. So this conversation, this thing, whatever this is,
yes,
is
our whole deal.
Is the part where we just kind of like chat and catch up and talk about stuff we've been watching and share stories about like what's been going on professionally or personally or whatever, reminisce.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff is going to actually end up in the body of the new podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been talking on Plus Expenses about this transition since we decided to do it, which was like a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's a sudden new thing. And also, we've had a lot of excitement about the new project.
Yes.
So that's been good. But yeah, sitting down to like watch the last 2 episodes of the Rockford Files.
Yeah.
Like the last one we did, which was the first episode aired. And then this one, which is coming out after this Plus Expenses comes out, which is the season finale, final episode.
Deadlock in Parma, right?
Deadlock in Parma.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I didn't I have never watched the wrong episode for this entire run, and every single time I've lived in fear of watching the wrong episode. I did it. I made it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a little. I felt like, I don't know, so like sitting down to like do the show notes and like watch that show definitely was a little. It was like nice because of the new project, we've been concentrating on that so much. Sitting down to do 200 a day has been
get to go back to it. Yeah.
Because I'm so used to it. But the last two have been a little more like, oh man, like I'm enjoying the episodes, but it's felt like a little bit of a bummer just because of what it means.
Yes, the ending.
Because it's kind of like closing the last chapter of something. And it's not we're not totally shutting down 200 a day, as we've discussed on that show, or on that Patreon at least. We're going to continue doing some other things that are in the Rockford / James Garner / 70s detective genre bubble.
Just catch as catch can, right? Like we'll probably do like a couple a year or something that.
Right. And so that, that feed will remain because people find the show, whenever. The Patreon is going to stay live as long as possible, just to keep an archive of all the stuff that has gone on there, because like for a while now we've put a bunch of screenshots in each of our show episodes, and there's listener patrons have comments and feedback, and there's a little bit of discussion and stuff like that, so that stuff's all going to stay. But yeah, it's like it's kind of a closing one door as we're opening another. Like simultaneously opening another, which is kind of a weird place to be. I don't know. How are you doing?
Same. I just realized I asked the question, then I thought, we got to save the emotions for the episode, right? Like we do. Yeah. We will have to get into this when we record the episode. Otherwise, it'll seem really weird that it's a final episode and we don't comment on it. Mm-hmm. But excited about the future and our future projects, while also, bittersweet about. It's really kind of neat. I was thinking last night about how not very often do I get to put so if you're here for the final Rockford Files episode and you don't know already, Nathan and I are tabletop role-playing game publishers, and so there's a feeling when you've finished a game and you've published it and you've shipped it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that game is done, but it's not. You gotta promote it. You have to run it at conventions. You have to. There's no end to that process. Things will fade into the background. There are games that we've made that we just don't really need to support anymore for whatever reason. Like sometimes they do okay on their own, and sometimes it's just like, well, that dog won't hunt, like that kind of thing.
Or even if you like delist something, like every so often, it's like, okay, I'm just going to take this out of my catalog. You get an occasional email every so often of someone who's looking for it or following a link and it's dead, or has a question and is getting to you with it 10 years after the game came out.
Yeah. But it's like, it's a tale.
Yeah.
Through time. Anyways, but this, it's not like it's, like you said, we're going to be doing other things, but this just is kind of interesting that we do have an end to it. Like it's going to be a body of work that we have done, and we're going to put a little bow on it today and be like, there you go.
Yeah. Everything after it is kind of an appendix.
Right.
But like that's the end of the last chapter.
Yeah. And I say body of work when it's like that work is not a good term for it, because it's just fun. Like it was just something we've enjoyed doing and talking about.
Yet again, we have monetized a thing that we should enjoy and turned it into work.
Instead of doing things that make money for work. But looking forward to the future, we did record, like you mentioned, our first episode of the Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast, which is a mouthful now that I say it like that. Mm-hmm. I love it. And that was good and fun.
Yeah, we still need to find our stride on that one, obviously.
So, but that brings up why I think it would be nice. So typically we record plus expenses before 200 a day. Right. That's our pattern. We start with secrets.
Right. Yeah. And so where that has come from is when we would sit down to record in the early days, we would spend some time catching up first because we hadn't talked in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long it had been. And I think at a certain point, at a certain, I don't remember exactly how the idea came out. I think it was probably like, what else can we do to give the Patreon some additional value?
There's some incentive there to do a patron thing. Yeah.
So we were like, well, we're talking anyway. And we talked for like an hour or so, like just to catch up, right? And we're like, well, we're talking anyway, but we are talking about like stuff that is relevant to, well, I guess I'm not going to say it's relevant to our listeners, but like if we are mindful that we are talking to an audience when we're having this conversation, we can
use it.
We can use it. It's, I don't know. I feel like people who listen to podcasts, you have this, like I have this with some podcasts I listen to where I'm like, I just kind of like listening to these people hang out, sometimes more than whatever the topic is of the podcast, or sometimes like they do it for a little while, or sometimes it's threaded throughout. But anyway, I'm like, if people have that feeling about our show, like, I just like listening to these guys talk.
Yeah.
We can do that in a structured little side bit just for that, so that we spend the main show focused on the Rockford Files.
So what the things that have changed is now Nathan and I are forming a business together, the Unwritten Earth Symposium. It's going to be that podcast, but also game material. I may have overstepped my bounds here, but on the Swords Without Master Discord, I did announce that we're working together and that part of our plans for the future is a standalone version of Swords Without Master. So you heard it here second.
Yeah, no, that's not overstepping. I think I've been saying
we should do that.
we're going to bring some of our older titles under this house into the Symposium. We're going to do the podcast. We're going to do a Discord. We're going to do new stuff. And then as my one-liner and we should do new stuff is like, for example, doing standalone Swords Without Master is just like a slam dunk. Let's just do it project. Like that can just be on the list. And when we do it, we do it. And
anyways, this is exciting, but it also means that Nathan and I have to talk more often. And so we talk, we have like a weekly meeting that we do.
We have our weekly stand-up. That's a thing in business, right?
It is. I'm not standing during it. I don't know. No.
Are we agile? Are we waterfall? What are we doing?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's hear from our managers. Anyways, part of like what existed that started the plus expenses that had it like a beforehand thing no longer is there, right? Like we don't need to have these discussions beforehand because we're already having the discussions, which means now we're free to do it wherever we'd like to. And my proposal to do it afterwards is that it gives us a chance to ruminate on what we talked about. Okay, right. When you do a Rockford Files podcast, you have an episode of the Rockford Files to talk about. When you do an Unwritten Earths podcast, we have invented little games for each other, and the last Plus Expenses was the start of that. You didn't miss anything if you weren't here for that, because it was in the previously in our Unwritten Earths.
Yeah, so that show is more of talking.
There's less to hang our conversation on, right?
Exactly. Like it's not, we're not reflecting on something that exists. We're actually talking about we're talking about new things in Unwritten Earths.
So I think it actually would be beneficial for both if we do the Unwritten Earths podcast, we record it, and then maybe the next week we record the plus expenses. That gives us time to think about what we said, if we want to like add other details to it. Okay, so here's an example, the real life example from what we just recorded. I flubbed the discussion about the Discord on the Unwritten Earths podcast. We were like, and we're going to have the Discord, and then we just didn't really talk. Like I tried to like explain what we were going to get out of the Discord, and it was a little like, well, what are Discords for? It was like, and I think I have a better story for it. So may I pitch the Discord to you now?
I'm listening.
And we could either cut this and put it in the episode if it's necessary, or we could just leave it in plus expenses. That's what I think the benefit of doing it later would be used. It gives us a chance to like not correct errors, but just refine what we're saying, right? So I'm going to start with a war story. And that is this past week, I was having a conversation with someone about the early days of Dread, and I was trying to figure out roughly how many people played Dread before it was ever published. and I think it's in the thousands.
Must be nice.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal, right? Starting in the late 90s, the very late 90s, that was roughly when the first conception of Dread came about. So there was 4 of us that made up the Impossible Dream. We were all college buddies, and we would go to conventions, and at least half of us would run 4 games of Dread at each convention, sometimes more, and we would go to like 3 or 4 conventions a year. And that went on increasing in the number of conventions and whatnot until it was published in 2005. 2005. I think it's almost 20 years old. So we have 2 to 4 people running games for 6 people at a time, although like some people would come back and play the game over and over again until we figured out that we need to like run the same scenario, otherwise they'll keep trying new. That's another war story. If you're going to a convention, run the same scenario over and over again. That way you encourage new people to play, and old people will be like, oh, I played that scenario, I don't need to.
You also get good at running that scenario, and it's
yes, exactly.
Like a really like tight, refined experience.
And you're not wrecking yourself trying to come up with new scenarios every single time, because that was what we were doing in the beginning, and it was wrecking me. Like I would try and have like 4 new scenarios every convention. That was, anyways. The point is, roughly 6 people, let's say 2, that's 2 people running it each time, 4, so that's 8 times 6 is what? I had this in my head. 8 times 6 is 48, and then like 4 times a year. So it's, and then 5 years, it was 500 to 1,000 people or whatever,
sure,
depending on like, there's a lot of variables in there, but it was roughly that.
Yeah.
And then, those people, a lot of them, when we finally had a physical copy of Dread to sell, that first Gen Con we sold it at, there was somebody who bought it who played a game of it with somebody who played a game with it who played in one of our play tests. There were people playing it out there in the wild. So the number gets big. It's at least 1,000, if not 2,000 or whatever. That's 2,000 is probably pushing it, but like 1,000. That, like, aside from Dread being like a real easy elevator pitch, it's the horror role-playing game that uses Jenga. Bam. But I think that the fact that it hit that ground running so hard, I think, is probably one of the major factors in why it's lasted.
Yeah.
And so bringing this back to the Discord, that's what I want out of the Discord. I would like to build a community that plays other people's games. In the early days, we all played each other's games. And I mean, we still do that, but like that was a huge thing. Like Emily ran JiffyCon, which is just a convention to bring people together to play the games that they were writing. Like, that's all it was. It wasn't a huge convention. It was a nice little local one, but everyone there knew that they were playing a game that somebody there had crafted or a friend of a friend had crafted, you know, like kind of thing. That's my vision for the Discord, is a community that's around playing each other's games for that experience. Like, I want to be also very clear, like, not let's figure out how we're going to be the best play testers. It's not, you just want people playing games.
Right. Like, and they don't necessarily need to be like new games or whatever, but we want it to be a place where you can bring something you're working on, have people play it, and then a year later, when you publish it, whatever venue you use to publish it, there's already a community of people who are like, oh, I remember playing that, and here's why it was so great. Yes.
This is what I did in it. And you know, here are things you could do in it. Or, oh, I played in this game. You should check it out because I think you will like it.
Right. And I know that because I know you and I know the game. And I knew the game back before it was good. Right.
Yes. Yes.
So I know exactly how better it is now. Yeah. There's this experience that, and again, a convention experience. It's wild, I think, how much of our, like, specifically you and me, I think our experience with conventions has been very similar, which is one reason, like, this is working for us. Where it's like, I'm going to go ahead and say that you're better at conventions than I am, because you're more personable, in my opinion.
Well, if you'd stop punching people when you meet them.
I know. If I just stop suplexing everyone. That's the problem, though. It's the brand, right?
Right, yes.
But there's this experience from doing a circuit of conventions, and this all broke down during COVID, right?
Yeah,
and
right,
we're like just now, like I went to two conventions this year, and they're the first conventions I went to since 2018, because I took a year off from conventions because I was burned out, and then COVID. But what am I trying to articulate here? The experience of going to a convention, meeting people is always great. Meeting people at the game table is like the reason to keep doing this.
Yeah,
making friends through playing games is the best.
The energy you get. Another very important selling point is just if someone's playing your game, you're encouraged to write your game, right? Like, it's just playing it makes a great feedback loop for the creator.
But then there's this sub experience, I think, for not just designers, but I guess highly engaged people, like people who are very engaged in whatever individual scene that's their thing. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's people who are on the Forge, if it's OSR people, if it's New School, like whatever. LARP is a huge community of huge overlapping set of communities in the LARP space that I think have this happen. You play a thing, and maybe it's a off books playtest, or maybe it's on the, it's a regular session, but you walk in and you sit down. It's like, all right, I'm playtesting this thing, looking to get this feedback, whatever. And the story you tell other people after the convention is like, oh yeah, and I played in this thing.
Yes.
And whether it's because of the experience of doing something that's like, oh, this is new. Like, this is the first time I'm running this game. So like everyone at that table now has a story of, oh, I played in the very first session of this particular game. Or like, this was like, again, like a secret game, or like, we got together in the lobby and played, or went to this, this person's like hotel room to play this game because they weren't sure if they could get it in the schedule or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Or I signed up for the playtest session of this game, and it does something special, right? And part of that is that experience of like being in on the ground floor, right? That's part of the mix. But when that syncs up with a game that also speaks to you, those are like super memorable and really motivating. I mean, I'll speak for myself here. Having that experience playing other people's games made me want to create that experience with my games.
Yes, exactly. Playing games that haven't been, like, I'm going to like avoid the word playtest here, and I just want to talk about playing games that haven't been published yet.
Yeah. I've played some games that, are finished, but just aren't published. Or are private, or like whatever. I tell this story from time to time, but there was a convention I went to where I did a playtest of Swords that was miserable. And I think partly because some people at the table were like, let's push the limits of this system. That's not what it's designed for. It's it's a high trust kind of
it's not an automobile. You don't have to like survive a collision with a wall at certain miles per hour or whatever. They were stress testing it, and there was no need to do that. And like afterwards, I was depressed. I was like, this game is whatever, and I kind of moped away from. Like, I think we did an okay job, but I did not have fun playing it, and I like it had this. It was a real nadir, right? Like, it was a moment for that game where I was like, oh, this is just going back on the compost heap. I'm done. I'm like, maybe these ideas will surface some other time, but I'm not going to pursue this thing. I don't have the energy to pursue it. I don't want to keep using the word energy like that, but whatever. I don't have the will to pursue it anymore. And a friend said, tomorrow morning, we're still at this convention, and he says, tomorrow morning I'm going to run Swords for you, and let's get some people. I'm going to change this for you. And he did, and it was amazing. And it turned it around, and it's maybe the only reason why that game exists right now. Like, it was this wonderful, like, we're just going to play. We're just going to sit down and play. I'm going to show you what I love about the game. And I want to facilitate that experience for other people. And I don't know how to yet. Like, that's the other thing. We're still figuring this out.
It's going to be a work in progress, but like any design project, right? Like, we've thanks to you, or articulating our goal here. So we're going to we're setting up some structure to get started. And then as we go, we'll find out what's working and what isn't working. And sometimes that means changing the goal, right? Like if we're like, oh, what is working in the Discord? If it turns out that for whatever reason, it's really helping this other thing happen,
right,
then this goal, can be a sub goal. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we'll keep that goal, but it may not be the thing we're going to end up.
Yeah, in like 2 years or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
no, that's great.
Yeah, and so here's the thing, coming back around. If you heard this on Plus Expenses, you're in on the secret. But it might be that you didn't hear anything there. We cut it out. We put it in our main episode because I think that's one of the things we want to do is just kind of like ruminate, give ourselves time to ruminate and alter what we said before, or just like deliver a better primary podcast, not at the expenses of Plus Expenses, but like
never at the expense of Plus Expenses. I'll take a listen. So, behind the curtain, everything we do is heavily edited because both of us are not great extemporaneous speakers. We're just talking.
We're not, there's no script.
So when I listen back, if I feel like there's a good chunk of that, I can drop it in. But I think I'll leave it here too, because that's
get the whole context. And so that might end up being an experience in Plus Expenses from time to time. You get the larger, the director's cut.
Yeah, exactly. So this will be, so one thought I had is that also those things will converge over time. Like over time as we learn what Unwritten Earths is going to be more, what the rhythm's going to be and more what we want to talk about on that. There'll be a little less revision, I think, and maybe a little more commentary in Plus Expenses. Yeah. So those two things will align as we get better at it.
It is wild that we go from almost 8 years of a podcast to just a slightly different format, and we're like, we got to relearn some things.
It's a different kind of show.
We got to learn new things. It's a different kind of show.
Yeah. I think it's there's different kinds of podcasts, and I think you can kind of hear. Okay, any podcast I've done, I'm basically just trying to replicate other podcasts in that space that I think are the good ones.
Right.
Yeah. So different kinds of conversations need to have different structures underneath them. Yeah. I think we know that as designers.
That's a game design.
That's game design.
Like, our good friend Vincent Baker often refers to games as conversations, right? Like the role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games as conversations. We still have a crossover audience here.
Yeah.
The next Plus Expenses, I think, will be down to just people who know what we're talking about when we talk about tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, the other thing about Plus Expenses is it's kind of been our gaming podcast, our secret gaming podcast for the gamers who also listen to our Rockford Files podcast. Because originally, back in the day, our structure for that was talk about the show we like and the lessons that we take from it to apply to our craft.
Yes.
And then after about 20 episodes, we're like, these are all kind of the same lessons.
Yeah. The Rockford Files, maybe that's a fun thing to do for a future Unwritten Earths podcast where we talk about the lessons we learned from the Rockford Files. Like as a retrospective of it, right? Like, but that was very fun in the beginning, and then we got to the point where I'm like, it's got a set of things it does incredibly well that we could learn from, and
one of the reasons it does them incredibly well is that it does them over and over and over. Yes, in an episodic format.
So we're like, okay, we're running out of things to dig into here, which is fine because it just turned out it was fun to just talk about the Rockford Files and highlight our favorite moments in it.
Yeah, we get to do a little media analysis. We get to do a little history. I get to make screenshots.
Sometimes there's a screenshot of some pro wrestling looking golfers that we're just like, hey, yeah,
it's just the greatest thing ever. Yeah. So for Unwritten Earths, the purpose of that show is to give us a place to talk about game design with the intention of designing some new games.
Yes.
Potentially designing a game together, which was kind of the original thing, was like, hey, we're game designers. At some point, someone is going to be like, why don't you guys ever talk about game design on your podcast? It's like, well, because we're talking about the Rockford Files. But yeah, if we had a podcast that was like, let's design a game together, That was the original idea. And then we kind of spun out, this business out of that.
I have a thing about role-playing games where, and I get yelled at for this, and if you disagree with me, it's fine. You can yell at me. Like anyone. Nathan can, because he's right here on the hot mic.
I can.
But if you're out there and you disagree with it. But here's the thing about role-playing games and adults. This is specifically about adults. As adults, it's very difficult for me to say, hey, you want to come by my house Friday and we'll pretend we're in a spaceship? But it's very easy for me to say, hey, this Friday, you want to come by and we'll play some Traveler? And those are exactly the same sentence. So I think our podcast conception sits in that same zone. We're like, hey, you want to
have a phone call every week where we talk about game design?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, that sounds like a lift. Want to have a podcast?
Yes. Now we're talking.
Though one thing that's been happening, and I think maybe this is a little bit of I don't know, I think there's a lot of factors actually, but recently, one thing that I have noticed and thus have been trying to do more is the designers who are kind of doing the most interesting things to me are ones that are having offline, are hanging out with people, right? Are intentionally, are having phone calls, are doing meetups, whatever. Not in a promotional, let's go to convention context, but in a hey, you want to have a call kind of thing. And so I too have been trying to do that a little bit more. And that's had a real return. I'm just keeping my energy optimistic, I guess. So this is not to denigrate the idea of hey, maybe we should just have a call every week, which now we do because we're talking about Unwritten Earths as a business that we're launching. Anyway, this is all neither here nor there. The point is we're going to design some games, ideally, maybe one together, but also part of the little games that we've designed to put into the podcast are to try and trick each other into designing a game for the other person.
Yes.
Ideally at some point,
we'll make something.
But also, ideally at some point, Epi will be like, oh, I had this idea for a game. I'm going to get working on it. I'm going to be like, yes, that's the game I wanted you to make.
Yes.
And vice versa.
As we talk, I'm sorry, I'm typing because as we talk, I realized something that we probably want to do in a future, at some future Unwritten Earths podcast, I'm going to talk about the process of organizing a coffee and game design.
Oh,
and because what you were saying just fit right there. And we don't have to go into it here because obviously that's...
Save it for the show.
We'll get to it when we get to it.
True facts. Yeah. So I guess since this will be on both feeds, if you are a 200 a day listener, first of all, thank you. It's been amazing. We will continue doing some of these, but sporadically. So on our list is Marlowe, the movie from 1969 with Bruce Lee and James Garner as Marlowe, the Raymond Chandler, protagonist.
Yeah.
We want to talk about some Maverick, probably primarily the con game episodes that all the Rockford Files con game episodes were versions of.
Yeah. Richie.
Oh yeah, Richie Brockleman, Private Eye.
Richie Brockleman, Private Eye. Yeah.
Nichols, the show that kind of was the pre Rockford Files show that James Garner was in, that Roy Huggins did, that did not go well apparently. What else? And then we've had some suggestions from listeners, maybe some Magnum PI.
Yeah.
There was someone on the Patreon threw out that Burn Notice is very, it's kind of like a modern, but, contemporary.
It's been a long time since we can't say it's modern anymore because it was out when we were
I know, it's 2000s, 2010s kind of.
But we can check it out. Terriers. Oh, that one's a good one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of future out there.
Yeah. And because, we like these shows and these movies and we like talking about them, sometimes we might watch something and be like, this doesn't really give us a lot to talk about, which is possible.
Right.
Then we'll change our conversation, I guess, to be a little different.
We could just be, I honestly think that since we're not saying what the next episode will be at any moment, they could just be surprises when they happen and whatnot. It does mean, just to peel back the kayfabe a little bit here, it does mean we have to figure out a new April Fool's Day
I know.
tradition.
I know.
20 a day won't cut it with Unwritten
20
Earth.
a day is over. We finished 20 a day.
Yeah,
the last episode was April 1st, 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will need to figure out a new April Fool's tradition, but we'll get there. We'll figure something out.
We have time. TikTok.
Yeah, we'll release a TikTok on April Fool's.
Yeah.
One a year.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you, 200 a day listeners.
Yes. Thank you very much. Heartfelt.
I think we say this every time we talk about this topic, but like the fact that our like little side project has its own independent audience from Game Stuff.
It's wild.
it's wild, but it's been like really affirming. Like it's been a really positive thing. So thank you all. Yeah. And then moving on to hello, new listeners. We have our new podcast.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, you're getting in at the ground floor on this one. We recorded our episode 0, which will be on the feed. I think I'll probably put them both out at like the same time. So
yeah.
So you'll hear us stammer and stumble around this stuff in that as well. But we'll figure out what we're doing. Not in the sense of like, what are we even doing here? But more in the sense of like, what's working? What's the rhythm that feels good? Because like I think part of that conversation felt really strong and like, oh yeah, this is good. And then part of it was like, this needs a little more something. Either we need to structure it differently or whatever.
Yeah.
But, so that effort and all of the Unwritten Earth Symposium is going to be supported by a Patreon as well.
Yes.
And so that's going to be patreon.com/unwrittenearths. We're going to have, what are they called on Discord? Roles? Special roles?
Yeah, there'll be roles that'll be to indicate that you're one of the patrons.
Yeah, so it'll be like patron-specific roles as like a little thank you for being part of that. But the Discord will be open to everyone.
Yeah. More egalitarian than than the idea of roles would indicate. Yeah.
So there'll be some special, I don't know, some little bennies for being part of the Patreon on the Discord. There'll be plus expenses will be patron only, other than like this public every so often we'll drop a public episode, but generally it'll be patron only, and it comes out in between each episode of the main show. So you get twice as much podcast if you're a patron at all levels. We don't gate it to a certain level. Patrons will also, there will be some levels to automatically subscribe you to our upcoming annual publication. More to come, but we're gonna kick off Unwritten Earths with a annual publication collecting the best of whatever our librarians have been gathering in the Symposium library over the past year into one all killer, no filler volume of
there we go.
Adventures of spells and gear and weird stuff, maps, locations, enemies, friends, stuff that you can put into your games or use to run a game that doesn't necessarily need to be run with a certain kind of game, but we will have tools for doing this particular adventure as a horror adventure with Dread, or as a sword and sorcery adventure with Swords Without Master, obviously. Or as a wrestling episode with Worldwide Wrestling.
It'll be stuff you could use in any game that you care for. But obviously we have some pretty decent experience pointing it at our games.
Right. Yeah. There'll be some specific support for how to pitch it, how to put it in a certain vibe. And also they're going to be aesthetically the kinds of stuff that we write our games to support. So
exactly.
There will be some games that will be easy, that they'll slot right into, and some games where it's like, you can use them, but it's up to you to make sure that all the mechanics sync up with what the adventure is trying to do or whatever. So anyway, that'll be a standalone thing, but there'll be patron levels to automatically subscribe you to that. So you'll just get it when it comes out. And we know this is a high trust situation because we're just starting. So I don't begrudge anyone waiting to see what that looks like.
Yeah.
But we're going to have that there for...
We hope that you're pleased. We think you will be. Because we're pretty excited about it. Like, I don't get this feeling for things that don't.
Right. And that's also not patron exclusive. That's going to be a publication. This is getting you in on the ground floor, as we say, and also helping us gauge how much interest there is in this kind of stuff.
Brass tacks. We are publishers who need to make a living off of this. So we need to make some money publishing and selling our games. And it's very helpful for us to know roughly what the general interest is in it to like decide how much art to buy from actual human artists,
right.
Or like what physical form it's going to take. I mean, like we know this. This is crowdfunding in a way. You've done Kickstarters. You know that like the more that a Kickstarter makes, the more it can put into it. We're not going to do like stretch goals and things like that. It's mainly we get to make a decision based on what we can see the interest is and what's coming in about the product that we're comfortable making.
Yeah, so that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is to build up this Discord community and get it to the place that Epi was so eloquently describing earlier, where it can be a space to, I mean, just kibitz about games, but also a place to bring a game that you're excited about running, whether it's your game or someone else's.
Yes.
And then find a community of enthusiastic players who will then evangelize, for lack of a better term, because this is where all the good stuff, not all the good stuff, obviously, but this is where good stuff is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we keep reiterating this, and we probably should call it quits at some point on the Plus Expenses. But yeah, Nathan and I have collectively almost a half century of experience in this industry. We have some answers, not as many as we'd like, but we'd like to share those with you. Like if you're making games, we'd like to help you out. And we'd like to start conversations so maybe we can answer some questions that we have. The field is always changing. Like the technology and companies that own the technology silos keep pulling the rug out from underneath us. And, sorry, not going to get on that vibe. The point is,
that's the kind of thing we talk about on Plus Expenses a lot.
Yeah. It is I'm trying to think of like how not to be, up here and highbrow about this, but like we want to teach and learn at the same time is what I'm saying.
Right.
We have things that we can tell, that we can share about what has worked and what hasn't worked for us. And we'd like to hear from people about the same, at whatever level you're at.
I think this is a pretty common experience. It's certainly been true for me that one of the most effective ways for me to level up my understanding of something is to teach it to someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's a virtuous cycle when you get into those loops. So it's the Unwritten Earth Symposium, and it's kind of a fun title that hits both of our aesthetics,
Yeah.
But the symposium part is actually kind of important.
Yeah.
The idea, whatever, it's our venture, but we want to create a space that can be one of communal conversation that generates new things in the world. And I feel like that is what a symposium can do.
Yeah.
To get a little arty about it.
Or shines new light on old lost ideas.
Yeah. You can go deeper on things or you can discover new things, or both.
Yeah.
Or do one by doing the other. So so a lot of our metaphors that we use internally are, we're a college of wizards, and we are putting on this symposium. And so that's kind of one of our organizing principles for the whole thing. So, we hope that you will join us.
Come play pretend with us.
I think that sounds like a good place to sign off this crossover Plus Expenses. Do you have anything else for both of our groups of friends?
I'm looking forward to celebrating the Rockford Files with this final episode, and looking forward to see what new adventures the future holds for us. Yeah.
I feel like that's a good place. Should probably cut it there.
Yeah.